Jasmine Crockett and Lauren Boebert clash in a high-stakes battle on the floor of the U.S. Capitol over a groundbreaking education reform bill that could change the future for millions of children. With over 30 million kids trapped in underfunded schools, Jasmine fights for equal access to quality education, while Boebert, dismissing her efforts, cruelly brands her the drama queen, accusing her of making a spectacle for political gain. As tensions rise and emotions boil over, Jasmine turns Boebert's insult into a weapon, challenging the very system that has failed America's children for decades. Will this drama queen triumph, or will Boebert continue to crush her? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The stage was set for a pivotal moment in the U.S. Capitol. Jasmine Crockett, a passionate Democratic representative from Texas, stood at the podium to present her bill for educational reform, aiming to ensure equal access to quality education for low-income children. Her words called for greater investment in underfunded public schools, emphasizing that every child deserved a chance at a better future. Across the room, Lauren Boebert, a staunch Republican from Colorado, watched with quiet disapproval. Known for her conservative stance and skepticism of government spending, Boebert believed in cutting costs, not increasing them. She saw Jasmine's bill as another costly measure that would add to the national debt and argued that the solution lay in school choice and parental involvement, not more government funding. The debate was about to begin with clear divisions. Jasmine fighting for educational equity, while Boebert focused on fiscal responsibility and limited government. Jasmine's proposal sought to tackle disparities in education funding, while Boebert dismissed it as ineffective, favoring school choice instead. The stage was set, and the battle for America's education system was about to unfold. The chamber was still. Jasmine Crockett's impassioned words had barely settled when the cold, calculated voice of Lauren Boebert cut through the room. Jasmine had anticipated the pushback, but the sheer venom in Boebert's tone still struck like a thunderclap. With deliberate steps, Boebert rose from her seat, her posture rigid, the look on her face one of unwavering contempt. Her eyes locked onto Jasmine, and there was no mistaking the smirk that played at the corners of her lips. Boebert was ready. This was more than a debate. It was a battle, and she wasn't going to let Jasmine's plea for equity go unanswered. Boebert's voice rang out with an unmistakable air of superiority. "Let's get something straight," she began, her words sharp, slicing through the charged atmosphere. "This bill you're proposing, this so-called solution, will do nothing but increase our national debt and waste taxpayer dollars on a failed system." The disdain was palpable, but what followed stung the room even more. Boebert's eyes never left Jasmine as she continued, her tone mocking. "You call it reform, but all it is political theater. You want to be the star of the show, don't you, Jasmine? The drama queen? That's what you are. You're here to put on a performance, to get headlines, not to fix anything that matters." Her words were venomous, sharp as knives aimed straight at Jasmine's heart. "Throwing more money at a broken system won't magically fix it," Boebert added, her voice rising with self-righteous certainty. "What we need isn't more government spending, more bureaucracy. We need real solutions, school choice, parental control, not more handouts that only make the problem worse." The insult, the drama queen, hung in the air like a taunt. Jasmine could feel it burn. It was more than just an attack on her bill. It was a denial of everything she had fought for. It was an attempt to erase the lives of the children she represented, to reduce their struggles to nothing more than a performance in Boebert's eyes. But Jasmine was not about to let this pass. She stood taller, every muscle in her body stiffening with determination, her voice steady but sharp as she prepared to respond. "Let me make one thing clear," Jasmine began, her eyes never leaving Boebert, her voice rising with quiet fury. "You want to talk about drama? You want to call me the drama queen?" Her words came out slow, deliberate, each syllable a challenge. "You're not fooling anyone. This isn't drama. This is reality. These kids, these children you're so eager to dismiss, they don't have the luxury of sitting in classrooms with the best resources, the most caring teachers, or the safest environments. They don't have the privilege of being able to choose the best school. because they don't have the option to choose at all. Jasmine's eyes flashed, her passion igniting. She took a step forward, her voice now stronger, firmer, cutting through Boebert's dismissal. You want to talk about fiscal responsibility? Well, let me tell you something, Lauren. True fiscal responsibility means investing in the future of this country. It means ensuring that every child, no matter their background, has the same opportunity to succeed. The future of this nation rests on the shoulders of these children, and it's our responsibility to ensure they have the tools they need to build it. The room was silent. Jasmine's words lingered in the air, each one piercing the heart of the argument. Boebert, for all her bravado, had no answer to that. She couldn't argue with the fact that every day children from disadvantaged backgrounds were left behind by a system that had failed them. Jasmine could feel the weight of the injustice pushing her forward, propelling her words with the force of a tidal wave. You stand there lecturing us about the dangers of government spending, but you're blind to the real problem. You're defending a system that continues to fail those who need the most help. You're choosing to protect the interests of the wealthy, those who can afford private schooling, and leaving the rest of us to pick up the pieces. Her eyes locked onto Boebert's, and she let the words sink in. You say it's a waste of money to help these kids? You want to pretend that the system isn't broken? That the countless schools in our poorest communities aren't falling apart? Jasmine's voice trembled slightly, but there was no mistaking the fierce resolve behind it. You talk about waste, but the real waste is the lives of children who are denied the chance to learn, to grow, to break the cycle of poverty. You call it waste, but what you really mean is you don't want to spend a dime unless it benefits those who already have everything. Well, I won't stand by while you write off these kids as too expensive to help. The weight of Jasmine's words settled over the room like a storm cloud. Every eye was on her now. Every word she spoke was a challenge to the very system Boebert championed. Jasmine's pulse quickened, the fire of righteousness surging through her. She could feel the truth of her message coursing through her veins, propelling her forward. You can call me the drama queen, Lauren, but the reality is this. These kids don't need more empty promises. They don't need more speeches about the dangers of government. They need action. They need us to stand up and do the right thing. For once. The silence in the room was deafening. Boebert's face had hardened, but there was something else there now, a flicker of uncertainty. Jasmine had struck a chord, and she knew it. The debate wasn't just about policies anymore. It was about justice, about doing what was right in the face of all the opposition. Jasmine had made her stand, and the fight for America's children had just begun. The tension in the room grew unbearable, the air thick with anticipation after Jasmine's impassioned speech. She had laid bare the urgent need for reform, for a fair and equal education for every child, regardless of their background. But before the room could settle, before Jasmine could gather her thoughts, Lauren Boebert's sharp voice sliced through the silence. It was cold, mocking, calculated. Boebert stood with a confident, almost smug posture, her gaze fixed on Jasmine, as if dissecting her every word. Once again, the drama queen speaks, she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. This entire bill, this so-called solution, is nothing more than a distraction. It's the same tired story, just repackaged for the cameras. More government, more spending, and less accountability. All this does is add to our debt while solving nothing. Boebert's words struck Jasmine like a slap, designed to undermine her proposal, to make it seem like a mere spectacle, a performance for attention rather than a fight for justice. The insult was clear, a pointed attempt to diminish the urgency of Jasmine's cause. You call this drama, but where was the drama when these kids, these families, were falling through the cracks of a broken system? Jasmine thought, her pulse quickening, the sting of Boebert's words fueling her resolve. But Jasmine refused to let Boebert's venom seep into her bones. Instead, she took a breath, grounding herself in the truth of what she was fighting for. She wasn't going to let Boebert define her or her work. You want to call me the drama queen, Lauren? Fine, she said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension in the room. Her words hung in the air, deliberate and piercing. But this isn't drama. This is reality. This is what's happening right now in classrooms across this country where children are being left behind, where schools are crumbling, and where teachers are forced to do more with less. Jasmine's eyes locked onto Boebert's, her gaze unwavering, as she slowly walked toward the podium. She didn't flinch, didn't back down. You talk about spending, but you're protecting a system that has been failing for decades. You're defending a system that has done nothing but widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. You defend tax cuts for the wealthy, but you refuse to see the millions of children who have no future without the proper education. Each word Jasmine spoke was a direct hit, a challenge to the hollow argument Boebert had put forward. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, her confidence rising with every truth she spoke. You say this is about the money? This is about more than money, Lauren. This is about investing in the future of this country. This is about making sure that the children who have been denied opportunities because of their zip code, because of their family's income, don't have to fight for what should already be theirs. The room was silent, every eye on Jasmine now, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. Jasmine knew this wasn't just about a piece of legislation. This was about the children she had met, the ones whose voices had been silenced for far too long. You can call it drama, you can call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, this bill is about justice. It's about fairness. It's about making sure that every child in this country has a shot at a future, no matter what their parents can afford. And that's something you can't ignore. Not anymore. Bobert's face hardened, but Jasmine could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. For a moment, Jasmine felt the room shift. She had hit a nerve. The truth was undeniable. You want to keep pretending this is just about a waste of money? But I'll tell you this. The real waste is the millions of lives that will be left behind if we don't act now. Jasmine's words were firm, each one filled with the weight of everything she had seen, everything she had heard from the family she represented. Her voice, though steady, carried the force of a call to action. You think I'm just playing politics, Lauren? I'm not. This isn't a game. This is real. These children are real. And I will not stand by while you continue to protect a system that is broken, that is unjust. I will not back down. If you want to call me the drama queen, then fine. I'll wear it as a badge of honor. Because this is the most important thing I'll ever do. Fight for the future of every child in this country. The room was still. Jasmine's words hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to question her. The weight of the moment was undeniable. For a split second, Jasmine saw the faces of her colleagues, some skeptical, some shocked, begin to soften. And for the first time in this debate, she saw Boebert hesitate. Jasmine had turned the insult around, making it a powerful statement of resolve, of purpose. And in that moment, Jasmine knew. This wasn't just about a bill, a piece of legislation. It was about something far greater. It was about changing the system, about ensuring that those who had been ignored for so long were finally seen. The battle was just beginning, but Jasmine had just found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence it. The atmosphere in the room had reached a boiling point. Jasmine's passionate defense of her bill had struck a chord with some. But Boebert wasn't done yet. The tension crackled in the air as Boebert rose once again, her posture sharp, her gaze cold. This time she wasn't just countering Jasmine's arguments, she was attacking her character. The room grew still as Boebert's voice sliced through the silence, dripping with disdain. You talk a big game, Jasmine, Boebert sneered, her words deliberately slow, each syllable heavy with sarcasm. But this is just another performance. The drama queen strikes again. You're making it seem like this is a matter of life and death. But we both know better. You're blowing this out of proportion to create a spectacle. It's nothing but political theater, and you're the star. Her eyes flicked to the room, gauging the reaction of the lawmakers before she shot Jasmine a pointed look. I guess it's easier to make a scene than to actually solve the problem, isn't it? Jasmine's jaw clenched, her fist tightening at her sides. The insult stung, but it wasn't new. Boebert's words were the same tired attacks Jasmine had heard countless times, designed to undermine her, to make her passion seem like nothing more than a staged performance. But Jasmine was no stranger to these kinds of attacks, and she wasn't about to back down now. She stepped forward, her gaze unwavering, and as she spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried the force of a storm ready to break. It's easy for you to sit there and mock what I'm fighting for, Lauren. It's easy to dismiss this as drama when you're shielded by wealth, by privilege, and by a system that works for you. But for millions of children, this is not a game. This is their future. This is the difference between them having a shot at a better life or being stuck in a cycle of poverty. Jasmine's words were sharp, each one cutting deeper than the last. You want a quick fix? A band-aid solution? But those don't work when the system is already broken. The system needs real change, and that change takes more than just lip service and empty promises. The room was so silent, Jasmine could hear her own heartbeat, loud and urgent. Every eye was on her now, every ear listening intently. Jasmine's voice, though steady, carried the weight of years spent fighting for a system that had long been neglected. What you call drama, Lauren, is the reality of children who walk into classrooms that are falling apart. It's the reality of teachers who are forced to work miracles with nothing but empty classrooms and outdated textbooks. It's the reality of families who are scraping by, trying to make sure their kids have the same opportunities that kids from wealthier families take for granted. This isn't drama. This is what happens when you refuse to invest in the future. Her chest was tight with emotion, but Jasmine didn't stop. You keep talking about easy fixes, school choice, parental control. But what does that do for the kids whose parents can't afford private school, who don't have the resources to choose a better school for their child? Those kids are stuck in schools that can't even provide basic supplies, that are overcrowded, that don't have the support they need to succeed. And you think school choice is going to solve that? Jasmine's voice was rising now, each word more forceful than the last. It's not a solution. It's a distraction. It's an excuse to ignore the real problem, the systemic neglect that's been allowed to fester for years. The tension in the room had escalated, the stakes higher than ever. Boebert remained unmoved, but the words Jasmine spoke were starting to resonate. They weren't just words. They were the cries of children who had been ignored, of families who had been overlooked. Jasmine wasn't fighting for herself. She was fighting for the future of the kids who had no voice in this debate, for the children who would continue to suffer if this system was allowed to persist. Without serious investment, without real action, this system will never change, Jasmine continued, her voice now steady and full of conviction. We can't keep throwing crumbs at the problem and pretending it's enough. We have to give these kids the resources they need to succeed. Or we'll keep watching them fall further behind while people like you, Lauren, keep talking about the cost. Jasmine's words lingered in the room, heavy with the weight of truth. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let Boebert's dismissals define the conversation. The fight wasn't just about policy. It was about the lives of those who had been forgotten. And Jasmine knew she would do whatever it took to make sure their voices were heard. The room was heavy with the sound of Boebert's scornful words, the tension rising with each passing second. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. She could feel the injustice boiling within her, the years of frustration spilling out into the open. As Boebert continued to belittle her, Jasmine's resolve grew stronger. She knew that she couldn't let this moment pass without hitting the core of the issue. The lives of children were at stake. Real children, not statistics, not talking points. Jasmine took a slow step forward, her voice unwavering but intense as she began. You want to talk about drama, Lauren? Let me tell you what drama really looks like. Her eyes locked onto Boebert's, and she didn't flinch. It's the drama of children walking into classrooms that are falling apart. No books, no technology, no proper heating or cooling. That's the drama you ignore every day when you sit behind your desk and tell me it's too expensive to invest in their future. It's the drama of kids who don't have a chance, not because they're not smart, but because the system has failed them before they even stepped through the door. Her voice carried the weight of truth, the raw emotion of someone who had seen this firsthand. Jasmine didn't stop. Her words hit harder with each sentence, her passion lighting a fire in the room. Do you know how many children in public schools are forced to learn in overcrowded classrooms? Do you know how many students go without lunch because their families can't afford it? Do you know how many teachers are spending their own money just to buy pencils and paper because the schools are so underfunded? Jasmine's hand moved as if emphasizing each word. You talk about fiscal responsibility, but what's the cost of leaving these kids behind? What's the cost of not giving them the same chance to succeed as children in wealthier schools, where the halls are filled with opportunity, not decay? The silence in the room grew louder as Jasmine's words sunk in. Her gaze never wavered from Boebert, but she was speaking to everyone now. I've seen the statistics, Lauren. I've seen the reports. Schools in low-income neighborhoods are underfunded by billions of dollars compared to schools in wealthier areas. The disparity is staggering. And yet you stand here and tell me that throwing more money at the problem won't fix it? What will fix it then, Lauren? What will fix the broken promise we've made to these kids? What will fix the fact that their futures are being stolen from them because of a system that refuses to invest in them? Jasmine's words hung in the air, thick with the truth that Boebert had tried to dodge. But Jasmine wasn't done. She stepped forward, her voice now rising with fierce determination. You can call me the drama queen, Lauren, but if standing up for these children means being dramatic, then I will wear that title with pride. Because these kids don't have a voice, and if it takes a drama queen to give them one, then I'm more than happy to play the part. These children need us to act, not to sit here and argue over semantics while their lives hang in the balance. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on Jasmine. She could feel the power of her words reverberate through the space, her passion fueling the moment. The tension between her and Boebert was palpable, but Jasmine knew the truth had been spoken. This wasn't just about a bill. It was about a future that was being denied to millions of children simply because they didn't have the same resources as their wealthier peers. She paused, letting the weight of what she had said sink in. I won't apologize for fighting for these children, she continued, her voice steady and unyielding. If calling attention to their plight makes me the drama queen, then I'll take that title every day. Because these kids, these real, living, breathing children, deserve a future, and I will not stop until they get it. Her words echoed through the room, a challenge, a call to action. Jasmine had turned the insult around, using it as a weapon to shine a light on the injustice that Boebert and others like her were so eager to ignore. Jasmine wasn't just defending her bill, she was defending the future of every child who had been abandoned by a system that claimed to care. The room was electric, the weight of Jasmine's words still hanging in the air. Her powerful rebuttal had struck hard, and Boebert, despite her usual confidence, felt the sting of being unable to counter the facts laid out so compellingly. The insult of calling Jasmine the drama queen had not achieved its intended effect. Instead, it had backfired, and now Boebert found herself grappling with the realization that Jasmine was more than just a political adversary. She was a force to be reckoned with. Boebert's lips tightened as she tried to recover. She looked down at the notes in front of her, pretending to search for something new to say, but the confidence that had initially propelled her forward was fading. The audience could feel it. Jasmine had done what few could. She had exposed the real cost of Boebert's ideals. The numbers Jasmine presented were irrefutable, the stories of children left behind too raw to dismiss. Boebert tried to find a comeback, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she argue against the simple truth that education was being held hostage by budget cuts? How could she deny that millions of children were suffering because their schools were underfunded and ignored? Taking a deep breath, Boebert tried again, but this time her voice lacked the sharpness it had before. Look, she began, but her words faltered. This isn't about throwing more money into a broken system. We've tried that, and look where we are. The government doesn't fix problems, it makes them worse. We need, to empower parents, not continue pouring money into an already failing bureaucracy. Her attempt to sound resolute was hollow, as if she herself was starting to doubt the logic behind her argument. Jasmine's eyes never left Boebert. She could see the crack in Boebert's armor, the hesitation. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a woman who prided herself on being unwavering in her stance. Jasmine, sensing the shift, pressed forward, her voice calm but laced with power. Is that really all you have left, Lauren? To push the same tired line about empowering parents? Because we both know the reality. Parents don't have the choice when their schools are starved of funding. Parents can't choose what they don't have access to. And your school choice rhetoric? It's just a distraction from the fact that you're actively sabotaging the public system instead of helping to fix it. The silence that followed was thick, pregnant with the weight of Jasmine's words. Boebert's face hardened, but it was clear she was struggling. She had nothing more to say, nothing that could address the raw truth Jasmine had just exposed. She tried to recover, her voice growing more defensive now. What we need is real, practical solutions, she said, her words becoming less coherent as she spoke. We don't need to throw more taxpayer dollars at something that isn't working. We need... She trailed off, the realization that she had no real rebuttal sinking in. Jasmine stood firm, the force of her argument crashing over Boebert's feeble attempts to recover. Real solutions, Jasmine echoed, a slight edge of sarcasm in her voice. You've had decades of so-called solutions, Lauren, but look at what's happened. Schools are still crumbling, students are still being left behind. Your solutions aren't working because they don't address the root cause of the problem. They don't fix the inequality. They don't fix the broken system. Boebert's shoulders slumped slightly, her gaze faltering for a moment. She had been the one to call Jasmine the drama queen, but now she was the one who looked like she was losing control of the conversation. Her counter-arguments were weak, her voice shaky. She was trapped in her own rhetoric, struggling to find the right words to make her case. Jasmine could see it all too clearly now. The cracks were widening, and she wasn't about to let Boebert slip away. School choice sounds great in theory, Jasmine continued, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. But let's not pretend it's a real solution for kids in underfunded schools. Let's not pretend that a voucher system will fix the fact that they're being left in the dark. The real solution is systemic change, and that's what my bill provides. Investment in these schools, proper, long-term investment, is the only thing that will work. Boebert could feel the weight of the moment, the realization that Jasmine was right. Her arguments were falling apart. The tension in the room had shifted, the power dynamics visibly changing. Jasmine had turned the tables, forcing Boebert into a defensive position, her earlier attacks now bouncing off of Jasmine's resolve. The room was watching, and Boebert could feel the eyes of every lawmaker on her, waiting for her next move. She had nothing. Jasmine had won this round. The tension between Jasmine and Boebert had reached a boiling point, with each word exchange becoming more charged than the last. Jasmine had turned Boebert's insult, the drama queen, into a weapon, a rallying cry for those who had been silenced for too long. The label that was meant to diminish her had now become the very thing that set her apart, a symbol of the deep injustice she was fighting to expose. As Boebert continued to flounder, Jasmine could feel the tide of public opinion shifting. The very term drama queen had begun to work in her favor. Jasmine stood taller, her eyes scanning the room, letting her newfound resolve wash over her like a wave. If this is what it means to be a drama queen, she said, her voice calm but filled with purpose, then I will wear that title proudly. Her words hit with the precision of a hammer striking steel. She paused, letting the room absorb the impact of her declaration. Because sometimes the reality of the world we live in, where children go hungry, where schools fall apart, where dreams are crushed before they even have a chance to take flight, is too much for people to face. So they call it drama. They call it an exaggeration. But I am here to tell you, this is no exaggeration. This is the truth. And if it takes a drama queen to tell that truth, then I will be your queen. The room was electric. The murmurs that had filled the space before were gone, replaced by an intense silence, broken only by the quiet shuffle of papers and the sound of Jasmine's steady voice. The force with which she spoke, the weight of the truth in her words, made it clear that she was no longer just playing a part. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she knew it. For the first time, the members of the room, the people watching from their screens, the media covering the event, all turned their attention to Jasmine. Her words had turned the tables, had exposed the weakness in Boebert's position. She wasn't just fighting for a bill anymore. She was fighting for the very people who had been denied their fair shot at life, the very children who had been written off as expendable. "And you can call me whatever you like, Lauren," Jasmine continued, the fire in her voice unmistakable. "But the truth remains the same. These children need us to act now. They need us to see their struggle, to understand their pain. You can mock me all you want, but it won't change the fact that this system is broken, and it's up to us to fix it." The crowd, previously silent, began to stir. A few heads nodded in agreement, the undercurrent of Jasmine's words reaching them, resonating in ways Boebert's rhetoric never had. What Jasmine had just done was nothing short of a masterstroke. The moniker Boebert had thrown at her like a stone had been repurposed into the armor she now wore with pride. She had turned the very idea of being overly dramatic into something positive, something that brought the harsh truths to light. "The drama queen?" Jasmine said, her voice almost amused now. "Fine. If that's what it takes to get your attention, then I'll be that. I'll be whatever it takes to make you listen." As her words reverberated through the room, Jasmine could see the shift. Some of Boebert's allies were no longer looking so sure of themselves. They were beginning to understand what was happening here. What they had dismissed as mere theatrics had turned into a powerful movement for change, a movement that could no longer be ignored. Public sentiment began to turn in Jasmine's favor. Social media buzzed with support. People were beginning to see that what Jasmine had labeled drama wasn't drama at all. It was a call to action, a wake-up call for a system that had long neglected those in need. The term "the drama queen" was no longer a slight, it was a badge of honor. Jasmine had become the embodiment of what it meant to stand up against injustice, to fight for those who had no voice. She wasn't playing a role anymore. She was leading a charge. And as Boebert's deflections grew weaker, Jasmine felt the weight of the moment shift in her favor. Her words weren't just reaching the room, they were reaching the people. The fight for educational reform wasn't just about numbers and policies. It was about lives, about futures, about the undeniable truth that the system had failed millions of children for too long. And Jasmine, now fully aware of the power of her words, was determined to make sure that truth could never be ignored again. The room had grown heavy with tension, the silent weight of Jasmine's words still hanging in the air. She could feel the momentum building in her favor. Her stance, unwavering and bold, set the stage for what would come next. Her plan. Jasmine didn't need to rely on theatrics anymore. Her argument was real, it was necessary, and it was backed by the raw truth of the inequalities faced by millions of children. She took a deep breath, and with a firm voice, she began to outline her vision for the future of education in America. "This isn't just a bill," Jasmine said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "It's a blueprint for change. It's a roadmap for a system that puts the needs of our children first." Her hands moved as she spoke, each gesture emphasizing the urgency of what she was about to reveal. "First, we address the crumbling infrastructure of our public schools. We invest in the buildings, the classrooms, the very foundations that have been neglected for too long. Every child deserves to learn in a safe, modern environment. We're talking about new textbooks, updated technology, and repairing schools that have been falling apart for decades. This isn't a luxury, it's a necessity." The room was hanging on her every word. She paused, letting the gravity of her vision settle in before continuing. "Next, we tackle the dropout rates. Too many children are falling through the cracks, leaving school before they ever had a chance to succeed. We need to provide mentorship, support systems that ensure every student stays in school, not because they have to, but because they believe they can succeed. We need after-school programs, summer learning opportunities, and counselors who can guide them when the going gets tough." Her eyes shifted from the lawmakers to the gallery, where families and students silently watched. "But most importantly," Jasmine's voice grew firmer, "we focus on the children who need us the most, the ones from low-income families. We need to level the playing field. This bill isn't just about funding schools, it's about giving every child the opportunity to dream, to grow, and to reach their full potential." She let her words linger, knowing she had struck a chord. Without investment, without support, these kids will continue to be left behind, and we will be complicit in that failure. Jasmine's chest rose with the weight of her conviction. She wasn't just advocating for change, she was demanding it. The room was still, but it wasn't the silence of doubt. It was the silence of realization. Boebert, however, wasn't swayed. Her lips curled into a tight smile, a look of practiced confidence returning to her face. Jasmine had expected as much, and now she prepared herself for the inevitable backlash. Without missing a beat, Boebert stood again, the sharp edge of her voice cutting into the air. "So, this is it, huh? Another government-funded program that promises everything but delivers nothing." She smirked, clearly unfazed. "This isn't a solution. It's a show, a political stunt designed to pull on heartstrings and get votes. You can call it whatever you want, but the reality is, this bill is just another piece of legislation that sounds good in theory, but doesn't actually address the core issues. It's a theater production, and you, Jasmine, are the star. You're playing the role of the hero, but when the curtain falls, nothing changes." Boebert's words were like a dagger, aimed directly at the heart of Jasmine's vision. She could see the intent behind Boebert's attacks, to minimize the seriousness of what Jasmine had proposed, to reduce it all to mere political performance. But Jasmine knew better. She had seen the data, she had met the children, and she understood the stakes. Boebert's words, while sharp, were hollow. Jasmine wasn't about to let her dismiss the real needs of these children with empty rhetoric. With unwavering resolve, Jasmine responded, her voice calm but dripping with conviction. "You can call it theater all you want, Lauren, but the real performance is happening every day in our schools, where students are being robbed of their futures, where the rich get richer and the poor get left behind. This is not a game. This is the reality of millions of children who are depending on us. And if you can't see that, then you are the one who's missing the point." The words hit like a freight train, and Jasmine could see the subtle shift in the room. Boebert's usual confidence faltered slightly, and she could feel the collective breath of the audience holding steady, waiting for her next move. The debate had taken a turn. Jasmine had made it clear that this wasn't about playing politics. It was about the future of a generation. She wasn't backing down, and with every word she was pulling the truth closer to the surface, no matter how hard Boebert tried to bury it. The air in the room was thick with the tension that followed Boebert's dismissive remarks. Jasmine could feel the sting of her words, but it was a familiar sting, one she had grown accustomed to. It was the sting of people in power dismissing the needs of the most vulnerable. Boebert's attempt to reduce her proposal to political theater only fueled Jasmine's resolve. She was done playing defense. Now it was time to drive her point home with undeniable facts, with evidence that couldn't be ignored. Jasmine took a step forward, her voice calm but full of purpose. "You want to talk about empty promises, Lauren? Fine. Let's talk about the promises we've made to children all over this country and how we've failed them. You say more government isn't the answer, but look at the countries that have actually invested in their education systems. Look at Finland, where education is not a privilege, but a right for every child, regardless of their background. They have some of the best schools in the world, and it's because they've made education their priority. They've created a system where students from all walks of life succeed, where inequality is actively tackled through the investment of public resources." Jasmine's words were calculated, sharp, cutting through Boebert's objections like a sword through paper. "Look at Singapore, where they've made education their most important social equalizer. They've created a system where every child, no matter their socioeconomic status, is given the opportunity to succeed. And guess what? They've seen incredible results. Their students perform at the top of international rankings, not because of selective privatization, but because they've invested deeply in public education." The room was silent, the only sound the rustling of papers and the occasional cough. Jasmine could see Boebert's face tighten, the crack in her defense widening with each example. Jasmine wasn't done. "You want to talk about what works? Look at South Korea. Their investment in education has not only elevated their economy, it's lifted millions of people out of poverty. South Korea has one of the highest rates of high school graduation in the world, and that didn't happen by cutting funding or shrinking the government. It happened because they realized that education is the key to breaking the cycle of inequality. Jasmine's voice grew stronger, each example building on the last, each sentence a punch to Boebert's argument. This is not about more bureaucracy. This is about creating the opportunity for every child to thrive. This is about giving every student the chance to succeed, no matter where they come from. This is about breaking the chains of generational poverty with the one thing that can level the playing field: education. The silence in the room was deafening. Jasmine could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air, the faces of her colleagues watching, absorbing what she had just laid out. And across from her, Boebert sat motionless. For the first time in this debate, there was a crack in her armor. She had no response. Jasmine's arguments had been too strong, too grounded in reality for Boebert to refute. Jasmine took a breath, watching Boebert for any sign of a comeback, but none came. The smirk had faded from Boebert's face, replaced by a cold, hard expression. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. It was a rare moment in the room, where one side had so thoroughly overwhelmed the other with facts, with truth, that there was nothing left to say. Jasmine knew she had won this round, but more importantly, she had made it clear that education wasn't a luxury, it was a fundamental right, and it was the key to ending the cycle of inequality that had held too many children back for far too long. The atmosphere in the room was electric, a palpable tension hanging in the air as Jasmine finished her final point. Boebert had no response. The words that had once seemed so sure, so strong, now seemed hollow in the wake of Jasmine's irrefutable facts and fierce conviction. Jasmine had stepped into the ring, and she had not only fought back but had dominated the debate, leaving Boebert unable to muster a single comeback. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustling of papers and the soft click of pens. Boebert's lips pressed into a thin line as she leaned back, her posture stiffening, the weight of Jasmine's argument sinking in. Jasmine stood tall, eyes unwavering, the victory already hers, not just in the debate, but in the moment she had seized. She had taken the insult of the drama queen and turned it into something far more powerful, a symbol of her unrelenting fight for justice, for children who had been ignored for far too long. Jasmine knew that this wasn't just about winning an argument, it was about making a statement. Her passion for reform, for fighting the system that had failed so many, had resonated through every word she spoke. The very nickname Boebert had hurled at her had been transformed, now a banner of defiance, a mark of the fight she had chosen to take on. Jasmine had turned the tables, taking the narrative back into her hands. And then, as the silence in the room stretched on, the murmurs began. At first they were subtle, faint ripples of approval from those who had been silently watching, but soon the whispers grew louder, building into something undeniable. Jasmine wasn't just talking about drama, she was talking about real, systemic change. She was fighting for the children whose voices had been lost, for the families who had been forgotten. The room, once divided, now began to lean toward her side. Across the room, Boebert sat, still silent, eyes flicking over the pages of her notes, but there was nothing left for her to say. The argument had been settled. Boebert's earlier accusations had been drowned out by the weight of Jasmine's truth. The silence that had fallen was not one of uncertainty, but of realization, a collective understanding that Jasmine's words had struck at something deeper than politics. It was about fairness. It was about dignity. It was about the futures of millions of children who were being denied the opportunities they deserved. Jasmine turned slightly to face the audience, her eyes scanning the room, seeing the shift in their expressions. It was subtle, but it was there. The understanding, the recognition that this wasn't about political theater. Jasmine's eyes softened for a moment, but her voice never wavered as she spoke once more. This isn't just about me. This isn't about drama. This is about the children who are being left behind in a system that has failed them. This is about making sure every child, no matter where they come from, has a shot at a future, at a chance to thrive. If that makes me the drama queen, then so be it. Her words hung in the air, powerful and clear. They were no longer just a challenge to Boebert. They were a call to action. Jasmine had made it undeniable that her fight was about more than a bill. It was about changing the course of a system that had perpetuated inequality for generations. The energy in the room shifted. The murmurs grew into applause, tentative at first but swelling as Jasmine's message settled in. People were standing up, some nodding in agreement, others clapping, a wave of support rising in response to the unwavering courage Jasmine had shown. It wasn't just the lawmakers who were listening, it was the public, the millions who would feel the impact of the changes Jasmine was fighting for. Her words had sparked something real, something powerful. Boebert remained quiet, unable to regain her footing. The game had changed, and Jasmine had made it clear that she wasn't backing down. She had not only won the debate, but she had transformed a derogatory term into a banner of strength, of resilience, of a call to arms. The drama queen was no longer an insult. It was Jasmine's weapon, her declaration of war against a system that had forsaken the very children it was meant to protect. And in that moment, it was clear. Jasmine had emerged victorious, not just in the chamber, but in the hearts of those who had heard her truth. The applause from the room still echoed in Jasmine's ears as she stood tall, her shoulders squared, watching the lawmakers slowly return to their seats. The fight had just begun, but she could already feel the momentum shifting. For a brief moment, Jasmine allowed herself to feel the weight of her victory. She had not only turned Boebert's attempt to diminish her into a source of strength, but she had exposed the true nature of the injustice she was fighting against. The silence that had hung over the room was now filled with whispers, whispers that were growing louder, more supportive. Jasmine knew she had made an impact, but what truly mattered now was what came next, how the people in that room would respond. The first shift was subtle, a glance here, a nod there. It started with a few members of the room, hesitant at first, unsure whether to acknowledge what had just transpired. But as the weight of Jasmine's words continued to settle, those glances turned into nods of approval, then murmurs of agreement. Jasmine's transformation of the drama queen insult into a tool of resistance had captivated them. She had become more than just a politician standing up for a cause. She had become a voice that could not be ignored. Slowly but surely, Jasmine was earning the respect of those who had once dismissed her. It wasn't long before a familiar face across the aisle, Representative David Morgan, a moderate Republican who had previously kept his distance from the debate, stood. His voice, usually calm and neutral, now held a note of genuine admiration. "I must say," he began, his tone steady but filled with sincerity, "Jasmine has a point. We've seen the numbers, we've heard the stories, and while I don't agree with every solution proposed here, it's clear that our education system is in crisis." The room fell silent again, and for the first time some of Boebert's allies were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Morgan's words ignited a ripple effect. Another Congresswoman, Emily Klein, a fellow Democrat who had been hesitant about some of Jasmine's more aggressive proposals, stood with a measured but firm nod. "Jasmine has shown us something important today. We can't keep ignoring the voices of the people who are suffering, who are being left behind in a system that only works for a few. This debate is no longer just about politics. It's about the future of our children, and that's a fight worth having." The applause grew louder, this time not from just Jasmine's supporters, but from both sides of the aisle. Jasmine had not only fought Boebert's dismissals, but had won over those who had once doubted her. Even some of Boebert's own colleagues began to shift, looking at each other with unease, their earlier certainty starting to crumble. Boebert, for all her force, couldn't argue against the moral high ground Jasmine had claimed. The term drama queen, meant to isolate and belittle, was now a symbol of Jasmine's resilience and ability to speak uncomfortable truths. The applause for Jasmine wasn't just approval for her policy, it was admiration for her strength in the face of ridicule, for turning an insult into a rallying cry. Jasmine's heart raced, but she kept her composure. The support was growing, but it was far from a win. She knew that this was just the beginning. The real work would come when they moved beyond the words and into the action. But right now, for the first time, she saw her colleagues, those who had once looked at her as a fringe player, begin to understand what she had been saying all along. Jasmine had proven, not just with her words, but with her conviction, that this fight was worth the struggle, that education was a battleground they couldn't afford to ignore. As the applause continued, Jasmine's mind raced ahead, planning for the challenges to come. Her victory in this room was significant, but it was just the start. She knew the road ahead would be hard, but now she had something far more important than support. She had momentum. Jasmine had shifted the debate, and now she wasn't just a voice in the crowd. She was leading it. The room had grown quiet, almost too quiet. Boebert had been silent for what seemed like an eternity, her usual quick retorts absent, replaced by the weight of her own realization. The momentum had shifted, the energy had turned, and she knew it. Jasmine's words had not just landed, they had struck with the force of a tidal wave. What was once a calculated insult, meant to derail her, had now become a symbol of Jasmine's power, her resilience, and her unwavering determination to fight for what was right. Boebert sat at her desk, her eyes fixed on the papers in front of her, but her mind wasn't on the words. She could feel the room shifting, the weight of Jasmine's argument pressing down on her. For the first time, she wasn't the one holding the floor. Boebert had come into this debate thinking she could easily dismiss Jasmine, thinking the label drama queen would silence her. Instead, she had watched as Jasmine had turned the very insult into a battle cry, one that resonated beyond the chamber and into the hearts of those who had been ignored for too long. The realization hit Boebert like a blow to the chest. She had underestimated Jasmine. She had underestimated the power of the truth Jasmine had exposed. The room had not rallied to her as she had expected. Instead, they had rallied to Jasmine. The more Boebert tried to push, the more Jasmine stood her ground, unshaken. Boebert's words, once so sharp, now felt dull, like a blade that had been blunted by the force of Jasmine's convictions. For a brief moment, Boebert's gaze flickered around the room, searching for support. But she found none. Even those who had once backed her, who had applauded her attempts to diminish Jasmine, now sat in uneasy silence, unwilling to challenge the raw truth Jasmine had so fearlessly laid out. Boebert's usual sharp edge had dulled. She had no more rebuttals, no more attacks to throw. Jasmine's strategy had worked. She had exposed the failure of Boebert's arguments, the emptiness behind her claims of fiscal responsibility. There was no place left for Boebert to hide. Boebert opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. She closed it again, her jaw tight. There was nothing more to say. The moment she had feared was here. Jasmine had not only bested her in the debate, she had taken the very weapon Boebert had tried to use to silence her and turned it into her own strength. Boebert's carefully crafted narrative had collapsed under the weight of Jasmine's truth. Jasmine's eyes stayed focused on Boebert, but she didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The victory was already hers, not just in the debate, but in the greater fight for fairness. She had done more than win a verbal sparring match. She had shown the room the true cost of ignoring the voices of those who had been left behind by a system built to protect the wealthy and powerful. As Jasmine stood tall, her posture unyielding, she knew the battle was far from over. But today, in this room, she had claimed a victory. Boebert had no more arguments. The moniker, the drama queen, had been repurposed, twisted into something stronger, something that represented not weakness, but the strength to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. Jasmine had not just won this round. She had turned the tide of the conversation in a way no one had expected. And in that moment, Boebert had no choice but to accept it. The applause that filled the room was not just the echo of a well-fought victory. It was a resounding acknowledgement of Jasmine Crockett's relentless commitment, her passion for the voiceless children of this country, and her ability to turn what was meant to be an insult into a powerful force for change. Jasmine had not just won the debate with Boebert, she had reclaimed the narrative. The drama queen, a title intended to diminish her and dismiss her struggle, had now become the symbol of her strength, of her courage to confront the hard truths that many in this room would rather avoid. As Jasmine stood there, allowing the applause to wash over her, she could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't a typical political win. It was something far more profound. It was the moment when she had turned the tables, when she had fought not just for a bill, but for something that went beyond policy. The very future of millions of children who had been forgotten, who had been abandoned by a system built to serve the privileged few. The look in Boebert's eyes, vacant, unable to respond, told Jasmine all she needed to know. The game had changed. Jasmine knew the battle wasn't over. It couldn't be. The applause was fleeting, the victory hard-won, but the road ahead was long, filled with the kind of resistance she had just faced. The systems in place would not be dismantled overnight, but what she had achieved was undeniable. Jasmine had become the face of a movement, a voice for those who had been ignored by the very institutions meant to protect them. She wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She was a symbol of hope for the millions of children in underfunded, overcrowded schools. Children who had never had the luxury of a fair shot at success. The murmurs of agreement that followed her response were becoming louder. Jasmine could feel the shift in the room. Colleagues who had once turned their heads at her proposals were now looking at her with respect. They were hearing her in a way they had not before. It wasn't just her passionate delivery that was winning them over. It was the facts, the truths that she had laid bare with undeniable clarity. Boebert, who had once been so confident, now seemed smaller, diminished by the sheer force of Jasmine's argument. There was no clever retort, no scathing comeback to counter Jasmine's call for justice. Boebert's earlier jabs had failed to silence Jasmine. Instead, they had only fueled her fire, pushing her to make her case even stronger. The name the drama queen, which had been meant to undermine her, was now tied to a far greater cause, the cause of fairness, equity, and justice for all children, no matter their background. As Jasmine moved through the room, her heart still pounding with adrenaline, she knew that this victory wasn't just hers. It belonged to every child in America who was still waiting for their opportunity to rise. It was for every teacher who had to fight for the resources they deserved, every parent who had to choose between food and school supplies, every student who was told they weren't enough because they didn't have the same resources as their wealthier peers. Jasmine was no longer fighting alone. She had become the leader of a movement, one that demanded change and would stop at nothing to see it through. But Jasmine's victory was not just about the debate she had won. It was about what came next. The countless meetings, the paperwork, the endless negotiations. This was the beginning, not the end. The battle for education reform, for justice in the classroom, was a fight that would take more than one debate. It would take every ounce of her energy, her determination, and her courage to continue. But Jasmine was ready. As she walked back to her seat, she could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, some in admiration, others in uncertainty. She knew that not all of them agreed with her. Not all of them understood the urgency of what she was fighting for. But that didn't matter anymore. Jasmine had shown them that the stakes were higher than they had realized. Education wasn't a luxury, it was a right, and she would fight for it, no matter how many times she was told to stop. Her phone buzzed as soon as she sat down. The first wave of public support was already pouring in. Social media erupted with messages of encouragement, hashtags filled with support for Jasmine's fight. People were seeing her for what she truly was, a politician willing to stand up for the voiceless, a leader who wasn't afraid to speak out against the entrenched powers that had ignored the needs of so many for so long. The drama queen, a term that had once been wielded to silence her, was now a badge of honor. It had become a symbol of those who would not be ignored, who would not be dismissed. And in the weeks to come, Jasmine would continue to rise, not just as a representative of her district, but as a leader in the fight for educational equity. Her opponents may have thought they could shut her down with an insult, but Jasmine had proven them wrong. The drama queen wasn't just a nickname. It was the rallying cry for the millions who had no voice, the ones who had been left behind by a system designed to protect the wealthy, the powerful, and the connected. Jasmine had found her voice, and she would make sure it was heard, loud, clear, and unstoppable. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. On a nationally televised showdown with over 12 million viewers, Jasmine Crockett confronts Sean Hannity over one of America's most painful divides: public safety versus systemic injustice. As Hannity demands more prisons and police funding, Jasmine peels back the curtain, revealing a system where being poor means being punished, and where freedom has a price tag of just $500. The clash intensifies when she unveils hard numbers, corporate ties, and the human cost of a justice system built on profit, not fairness. Her voice trembles, but not with fear, with fury and truth. What if the greatest threat to your freedom wasn't crime, but the system built to punish the poor? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The camera soared over the skyline of New York City, cutting through the amber haze of early evening before plunging into the electric blaze of the studio lights. Inside the Fox News set, the air was ice-thin, charged with tension, like the moments before a thunderclap. Sean Hannity leaned forward behind his polished desk, blue tie stiff and perfectly knotted, fingers steepled with theatrical control. Millions were watching. "Congresswoman Crockett," he began, his voice sliding with smug authority, "if police and prisons aren't given more funding, then tell me, who's going to protect American families from the criminals crawling our streets?" The words were razor-edged, engineered for maximum damage. Gasps rippled through the live studio audience, already stirred by the on-screen graphics flashing. "Crime wave. Are we handcuffing our heroes?" He smirked slightly, sure he'd drawn blood before the battle had even begun. Then, silence. The camera pivoted like a hawk closing in on its prey. It found her. Jasmine Crockett sat composed, dressed in a deep navy suit that absorbed the glare like armor. Her hand rested not on her heart, nor clenched in a fist, but firmly over a thick manila folder marked in bold black. "Undue detention, systemic injustice case files." Her eyes didn't flinch. They locked on Hannity with the cold fury of someone who had spent too many nights reading autopsy reports of teenagers who never made it home. For a heartbeat, she didn't speak. Her silence screamed louder than any slogan. A single beat of light ran down the edge of her cheekbone. Part sweat, part defiance. Then she slowly lifted the folder, placing it on the desk in front of her, like a war drum being set before battle. And though she hadn't yet said a word, every person watching could feel it. This wasn't going to be a debate. This was going to be a reckoning. And just as the silence threatened to tip into Jasmine's control, Sean Hannity leaned into the desk like a man reloading a weapon. Not to ask, but to dominate. His voice dropped to a low, authoritative rhythm, the kind that millions of loyal viewers had come to trust not because it was accurate, but because it sounded certain. "Let's stop pretending," he said, eyes narrowing as if bracing to deliver a national verdict. "America isn't just facing challenges. We're being attacked from within. Our cities have become war zones." He turned slightly, inviting the camera to capture his solemn expression, as if delivering a presidential address. Then the screens behind him flashed with bold, blood-red headlines. "Violent crime spikes 34% in Democrat-led cities. Carjackings triple in Minneapolis. New York homicide rate at 20-year high." He rattled them off like bullet points in an indictment. In Philadelphia, children are getting shot walking to school. In Portland, gangs rule the streets. In Chicago, it's a bloodbath every weekend. He paused, allowing the words to settle like ash in a burning room. "And what's the answer from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party?" he asked, turning his gaze to Jasmine now, with something between accusation and amusement. "Defund the police." His voice twisted the phrase, laced it with scorn. "That's not policy. That's not compassion. That's a roadmap to anarchy." Behind him, the screens began playing B-roll footage. A jewelry store being ransacked, sirens wailing, blurred figures running in the night. "You want fewer officers on the streets?" he asked, voice rising. "Then you'd better be ready for more body bags in the morgue." He slammed his palm lightly on the table for emphasis. Not rage, but performance. The studio lights flared slightly off the silver in his cufflinks. His tone lowered again, wrapping itself in the veneer of patriotic responsibility. "This isn't about race. This is about law. This is about whether a mother in Detroit can walk her daughter to school without being caught in crossfire. Whether a shopkeeper in Harlem can keep his doors open without being robbed twice a week." The camera panned to his audience, heads nodding, hands clasping, some whispering affirmations under their breath. Hannity was doing what he did best, feeding fear as proof of wisdom, but beneath his words, crafted to sound like protection, was a chilling implication Jasmine Crockett knew all too well. That safety belonged only to those who could afford it. That police were not guardians, but enforcers of a carefully structured order. And in this studio, she wasn't being asked to offer solutions. She was being put on trial for daring to question the system. Her silence in that moment wasn't hesitation. It was containment. Because while Hannity used crime as currency, Jasmine carried something heavier: stories of boys locked up for stealing diapers, of girls frisked in front of their schools, of black men beaten in silence and branded with records that would never let them breathe freely again. And she knew. When the nation equated justice with jails, the most dangerous lie was the one told with perfect pronunciation and a perfect suit. But just as Hannity's final word echoed like a gavel through the studio, more body bags, Jasmine Crockett moved, not abruptly, not with fire, but with the slow, precise gravity of someone who had sat across too many grieving mothers and read too many files stained by state-sanctioned indifference. She didn't raise her voice, but the silence leaned into her, as if the room itself was bracing for what was about to be said. She placed both hands flat on the desk, steady, grounded. Then came the cut, calm but surgical. "This isn't about crime," she said, her tone as sharp as a courtroom verdict. "This is about money, and who becomes a tool for profit in a system built not to serve, but to extract." Her gaze didn't leave Hannity. Her words weren't just spoken. They were directed like arrows. She reached into the folder again, drawing out a printed document with a single, heavy header: Vera Institute of Justice, Pretrial Detention Report. No graphics, no music, just paper and the truth. "This," she said, raising it slowly, "isn't an opinion, it's data." Her voice hardened. Over 400,000 people across this country are sitting in jail right now. Not because they've been found guilty, but because they couldn't afford bail. The word couldn't hit with force. "Let me say that again," she continued, pressing the sheet forward so even the camera could catch the bolded text. "Nearly 80% of all people held in local jails have not been convicted of a crime." Her hand trembled just slightly, not from nerves but restraint. "They're there because they're poor, not dangerous, not violent, just poor." She let that land. The audience didn't cheer. They couldn't. It was too ugly to applaud. Jasmine took a breath, but it wasn't relief. It was reload. "So when you talk about law and order," she said slowly, "what you really mean is punishment for the poor." Her voice thickened, but never wavered. "Because here's the truth, Mr. Hannity. If someone can pay $10,000 in bail for a DUI, they're home before sunset. If someone else can't find $500 for a petty theft they didn't even plead guilty to, they rot in a cell for 6 months, or a year, or 3. Her words pulled no punches. They were exact, merciless in their exposure. Justice in America is for sale, and the price tag is not written in law. It's stapled to your income. She lowered the paper back to the desk, but the weight of her message remained in the air like smoke after gunfire. "This system doesn't ask if you're innocent," she said, leaning in now, eyes cold. "It asks if you can pay." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table, white-knuckled. "And if you can't, well, then you are guilty until proven rich." The sentence dropped like steel. No music played behind her. No applause cue, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes when a wound gets named out loud. And if Hannity thought the room had absorbed enough, if he believed the storm had passed, he underestimated the weight of what Jasmine Crockett still carried. With a single press of a button, the back wall of the studio transformed, not into chaos, but into something far more damning: a clean, color-coded graph. No dramatic music, no manipulated clips. Just a silent curve rising steeply from left to right, glowing blood red under the cool studio lights. Jasmine didn't look at Hannity. She looked directly into the camera, into the eyes of every American watching. "This," she said, her voice sharp as frostbite, "is the price of mass incarceration in dollars. And it's going up, not because we're getting safer, but because somebody's getting rich." The chart behind her read Private Prison Revenue 2000 to 2020. Beneath the curve were the names of 2 corporate giants, Core Civic and GEO Group. Beside the line, the numbers climbed year by year, until they reached a chilling final figure, over 4.1 billion. 20 years ago, this industry barely scraped together $800 million a year. She continued, pacing slowly before the image like a trial attorney dissecting motive. Today, it makes over 5 billion annually, and not by accident, not by justice, but by caging human beings. Her tone didn't rise, it sank, like stone in water. This isn't a response to crime. It's an economy of captivity, a machine that eats the poor, chews up people of color, and spits out stock returns. She clicked again. A new visual appeared, a portfolio overview from GEO's investor report, with key phrases in bold: bed occupancy targets, cost per inmate margins, forecasted expansion. The studio froze. Even the camera hesitated, as if unsure whether to keep recording something so grotesquely real. "You want to know what justice looks like in America?" Jasmine said, raising her hand toward the highlighted phrase inmate quota thresholds. "It's a spreadsheet. It's profit per prisoner. It's a system where filling jail cells is more important than emptying them." She turned slowly now, her eyes scanning the crowd. "This isn't criminal justice. It's criminal enterprise." Then finally she drove the nail into the coffin. "They call it prison for profit, but let's name it clearly. This is racial capitalism wearing a badge." She pointed at a third chart: demographics of inmates in private facilities. Black and brown faces comprising over 67% of the population, though they represent less than 40% of the nation. "They don't arrest for justice. They arrest for inventory," she said, "because in this system, a black teenage boy isn't a citizen. He's a commodity, a line item, a dollar sign with a heartbeat." Her voice throbbed with conviction now, not outrage, but revelation. "The more they arrest, the more beds they fill. The more beds they fill, the more Wall Street smiles. And in that smile, entire families are broken." Her hand returned to her folder, but she didn't lower her eyes. "So the next time someone asks you why our prison population dwarfs every other developed nation, don't say crime. Say dividends. Say contracts. Say capitalism dressed as justice." The studio remained still, unnerved not by theatrics, but by how little of this had ever been said on a stage so large. Behind Jasmine, the graph didn't just climb, it loomed, like a verdict rendered by silence. But just as Jasmine's final graph burned itself into the minds of every viewer, like a financial autopsy of human suffering, Sean Hannity shifted gears, abandoning numbers, abandoning documents, and reaching instead for something older, something insidious dressed in faux common sense. He leaned back in his chair as if he had been waiting for this moment all along, lacing his fingers together and tilting his chin upward like a judge ready to render a verdict. His voice was smooth, performative, worn like a familiar suit. "Congresswoman," he began, lacing her title with a patronizing warmth, "you're talking about profits and prisons, charts and contracts like they sprang out of nowhere. But the real issue, the issue none of you on the left ever want to face, is culture." He motioned toward the camera as though inviting the country to nod along. "We can talk about Wall Street all day long, but let's not pretend that's what's causing gunshots in the streets of Chicago. Let's not pretend that's why 14-year-olds are joining gangs, or why entire neighborhoods are ruled by violence." Then he paused as if building toward the punchline he knew would land. "It's broken homes. It's fatherless households. It's a generation raised on gangsta rap, glorifying drug dealers, drive-bys, and disrespecting police." His tone dipped into a rhythm he had rehearsed for years. "The prisons didn't create the violence, Congresswoman. The music did. The culture did." He nodded, satisfied with the weight of his own conclusion, while in the audience, scattered heads bobbed with the ease of those who had never questioned that narrative. It was a familiar attack, old as Reconstruction, subtle as a lash behind a sermon. He didn't mention race. He didn't need to. The imagery did it for him. Absent black fathers, inner city violence, aggressive youth, beats and rhymes and blame. It was a tactic designed not to argue, but to divert, to shift the fault line from the system to the victim, from policy to pathology, from power to poverty. He folded his hands again and offered a final line like the last brick in a moral wall. At some point, maybe the real conversation isn't about police budgets, but about personal responsibility. He smiled as if what he'd said was reasonable, as if it was neutral. But Jasmine Crockett didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Her stillness wasn't silence. It was strategy. A silence thick as storm clouds before lightning tears the sky. She sat for 1 second more than was comfortable. Then she leaned forward, slowly, like someone lowering the barrel of truth onto the table. Her voice, when it came, was low and even, deadly calm. "You just turned the grief of entire communities into a punchline," she said, eyes locked on him like crosshairs. "You just traced centuries of systemic violence, economic starvation, red line maps, and state-sanctioned exclusion, and flattened it into a stereotype about music." She raised her hand, index finger trembling, not from fear, but fury held back like floodwater behind a dam. "Do not sit there in a $1 million studio funded by ad dollars and pretend you understand what happens in neighborhoods your producers wouldn't dare step foot in without a camera crew." The camera zoomed slightly, unconsciously drawn to her face. Her jaw was clenched, her breath sharp and measured. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Hannity," she continued, her voice sharpening. "Rap didn't invent violence. Gangs didn't invent fatherless homes. But this country, the system, invented poverty so deep it ate fathers alive through mass incarceration. It invented schools without textbooks and neighborhoods without clinics. It invented a world where children pick up microphones because the courtrooms and classrooms were never built for them." She paused long enough for her words to settle like steel. "And now you want to blame the soundtrack for the fire you lit?" The silence that followed was unbearable. Not because it was empty, but because it was true. And if the studio had still clung to any illusion of detachment, of politics as sport, of this debate as just another episode, Jasmine Crockett was about to end it. Not with more numbers, not with another chart, but with something far more dangerous: memory. She didn't speak right away. She reached forward with a deliberate calm, her fingertips brushing the worn edge of a separate manila folder. The camera caught the motion. Slow, reverent, heavy. "You want to talk about responsibility," she said, not looking at Hannity now, but down into a story the country had buried under years of indifference. "Then let's take responsibility for what we've done to children we never saw, or worse, refused to see." She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph, the kind that looks ordinary until you know the story behind the eyes. "This is Khalif Browder," she said. The photo hit the screen behind her. No music, no fade-in. Just a teenage boy in a plain white t-shirt, unsmiling. He was 15 when the NYPD accused him of stealing a backpack. He said he didn't do it. There was no physical evidence, no trial, no conviction. But because his family couldn't afford $500 in bail, he was sent to Rikers Island. Her voice dropped lower now, not softer but more focused, like a scalpel. He spent 3 years there, 2 of those in solitary confinement, locked in a cell the size of a parking meter box for 23 hours a day, for a backpack, for $500. The audience was silent now, not stunned, not confused, but gut-punched. Jasmine's hand didn't tremble as she reached again into the folder and withdrew a single page. Creased, aged, photocopied. "This is the letter he left behind," she said, "written 2 years after he was finally released, after the state let him go, but never let him heal." She unfolded it with unbearable care. The audience leaned in. The studio lights seemed dimmer. Even Hannity sat motionless, his gaze lowered. Jasmine's voice was steady as she read. "I'm sorry. I feel like I'm still locked up. I hear the keys every night. I can't breathe outside. I wake up expecting the guards. I don't want to be here anymore." She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. The words were sharp enough to pierce bone. When she finished, she folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it before her like a relic. Then she raised her eyes, not to Hannity, not to the audience, but to the camera, to the nation. "He was never found guilty of anything," she said, each word like a hammer. "But this system treated him like a monster because he was black, Because he was poor, because he couldn't post bail. She sat back slowly, her voice never rising, but the ground beneath her words shook with something deeper than rage. Khalif didn't die because of violence in his neighborhood. He died because the state put a boy in a cage, left him there, and called it justice. And then she said the line that turned the studio to ice. You tell me what part of that was about culture, and what part was just cruelty, legalized and monetized. And as the weight of Khalif Browder's letter lingered in the room like a ghost no one could exorcise, Jasmine didn't blink, didn't breathe, didn't offer the comfort of a pause. She reached forward once more, not to mourn, but to indict. With one firm click of the remote, the screen behind her shifted again, and this time, it wasn't a victim's face or a graph of racial disparity. No, this was colder, more dangerous. What appeared now were corporate logos, GEO Group and Core Civic, glowing like neon brands seared into the steel bars of American justice. Below them, lines of fine print began to scroll down the screen. Campaign donations, lobbying expenditures, bundled funds. A river of money flowing not into rehabilitation programs or school grants, but into election war chests. Jasmine turned toward the camera, her voice no longer wounded, but sharpened to a blade. You want to know why nothing changes? She asked, eyes unblinking. Why we keep locking up black boys for skipping school? Why minor parole violations send thousands back to prison every year? Look here. She pointed to the dollar figures lighting up the screen. $200,000 to a Senate super PAC in 2020, $340,000 in direct contributions to gubernatorial campaigns across 5 states, and millions more spent lobbying for legislation designed not to reduce crime, but to guarantee occupancy rates. The words landed like a gavel, but there was no court in sight, only a stage where power hid behind clean fonts and corporate silence. She clicked again, revealing a slide from GEO Group's own investor report. It read in bold, projected earnings tied to federal inmate populations. Underneath, another line. Occupancy thresholds must remain above 90% to maintain profitability. Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper, but somehow it cut deeper. They don't just build cages, they plan for them, forecast them, like a crop yield. Her hand trembled slightly now, not with fear but restraint. They don't fear crime, they fear empty beds. Then she turned her gaze directly to Hannity, expression unreadable, gaze flat as stone. This isn't politics anymore, she said. This is policy engineered by profit. And behind every tough-on-crime bill, behind every media segment that calls for more arrests, more punishment, more boots on the ground, there's a check, there's a donor, there's a lobbyist handing your elected officials a script. Her voice rose only slightly, steady like a rising tide. Because politicians don't need to pass justice anymore. They just need to pass profit targets. And then came the line, soft, devastating, final. Politics doesn't put people in cages, but the money behind it does. And that money has a name. She turned her palm up, gesturing behind her to the names still on the screen, Core Civic and GEO Group, as if they were defendants in a courtroom where the jury was watching live from every screen in America. And as Jasmine's indictment of corporate influence still echoed in the silence, Sean Hannity shifted in his seat like a man retreating to his last stronghold, ideology. His voice cut through the moment, sharp, defensive, desperate to regain the narrative. You're not just criticizing flaws, he snapped, jabbing a finger toward her. You're inciting a movement that seeks to erase the institutions that keep this country from descending into chaos. The words came fast now, a torrent wrapped in righteous fury. You call it justice, but what you're really doing is undermining law enforcement, undermining the rule of law. Let's not pretend. Your side chants defund the police and paints officers as villains. You don't want reform, Congresswoman. You want collapse. You want to burn it down and start over. His tone darkened. That's not brave. That's dangerous. The accusation hung in the air like a gavel slammed in haste, loud, clean, and intended to silence. Hannity's eyes flared with the certainty of someone who believed order was synonymous with obedience. But Jasmine didn't recoil. She didn't blink or smile or fold into the defensive crouch the moment invited. Instead, she sat back for a breath, a long, deliberate breath, and then leaned forward, anchoring her hands on the table like someone preparing to deliver a closing argument, not just to a studio, but to a nation. Her voice didn't rise. It dropped, low, precise, stripped of pretense. "No," she said, "I don't want to erase the law. I want to erase the illusion that it belongs to all of us, when it only truly protects some of us." She held his gaze as her words landed, steady and deliberate. "You mistake criticism for destruction, because you've never had to survive the system you're defending. You've never been pulled over for fitting a description, or had to bury a son who couldn't afford a lawyer, or sat in a courtroom where justice is a luxury, not a right." Her tone sharpened, but her volume stayed calm, a storm gathering behind composure. "What I want is not the end of order. I want the beginning of fairness." She glanced at the camera, her next words not a soundbite but a summons. "I want a system where the color of your skin and the balance of your bank account don't decide whether you get a warning or a weapon pulled on you." Then she turned back to Hannity, eyes unflinching. "You say I want to burn it down. I say I want to build it. For the first time. For everyone." Her voice trembled, not from doubt, but from the weight of every name she carried. Names not televised, not charted, but buried. "I don't want fewer laws. I want laws that protect, not persecute, that uplift, not extract, that heal, not brand." She leaned forward now, her final sentence slow and lethal. "Because a law that cannot protect the poor, the black, the voiceless, is not law. It's theater, and the curtain's been pulled back." And as the final syllable of Jasmine's quiet rebuke echoed like a slow tremor through the room, she didn't retreat. She advanced. With one hand, she reached back into her folder, this time pulling out a stack of annotated pages clipped with red tabs, pages worn at the corners, as if they had been opened and closed in rage 100 times. "We've talked about money," she said, her voice low and resonant, "and we've talked about politics. But now let's talk about the raw machinery of injustice, the numbers that don't lie, even when people do." She held up the first page, ACLU and NAACP logos in the corner, line graphs arcing like scars across the top. Then she clicked the remote. The screen behind her lit up with a simple visual, 2 vertical bars, one pale gray, one deep red. "This," she said, pointing to the shorter gray bar, "is the black population of the United States. 13%. She paused, not to emphasize, but to let the scale of that figure settle in the minds of those who had never really seen it. Then she moved to the red bar, nearly 3 times as tall. "And that," she said, "is the percentage of the American prison population that is black. 40%. The contrast was blinding. She turned slowly back toward the room, scanning it. "That's not a coincidence. That's not a blip. That's a pattern, a design, a message embedded into policy, into courts, into patrol routes and plea bargains and bail algorithms." Her tone darkened, not with volume, but with gravity. "This system doesn't just punish Black Americans more harshly. It expects them. It plans for them. It budgets for their incarceration before they even turn 10. She clicked again. A new slide appeared. This one's starker. A table, 2 columns, same charges, different outcomes. According to peer-reviewed studies from the Sentencing Project, for the same nonviolent offense, a Black defendant is 5 times more likely to receive a prison sentence than a white defendant. She didn't need to explain it further. The math was the evidence. The disparity was the crime. And in some jurisdictions, she added, judges have been shown to give longer sentences based solely on name and skin tone. That's not a flaw in the system. That is the system functioning as it was built. Her hand curled slightly over the edge of the table now, knuckles white from the pressure she refused to release. She took a breath, not to compose, but to sharpen. What we have is not a justice system. What we have is a machine of selective vengeance, a mechanism that processes Black pain into state data, that converts melanin into mugshots and records and ruins. Her voice dropped to a whisper now, but the words cracked like lightning. This isn't justice. This is legalized racial engineering, A caste system disguised as law. A pattern so complete that even silence becomes complicity. She let her final line fall slowly, precisely into the quiet. This is not equal protection. This is not blind justice. This is apartheid in legalese, codified, spreadsheeted, and quietly ignored. Until now. And just as Jasmine's final sentence, apartheid in legalese, settled like ash over the studio, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was electric, heavy, loaded with the kind of tension that turns truth into reckoning. Then, without warning, the control room buzzed in through the earpiece of the floor producer. A soft, clipped voice came through the headset. "We've got a caller. It's someone's mother." The line was already live. The producers hesitated. But something in the voice, fragile, shaking, cut through protocol like a blade. Hannity's team, for once, didn't protest. The screen behind Jasmine flickered. A black square appeared, blank at first, then slowly filled with audio waves pulsing in rhythm with a woman's trembling breath. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the phone line went wide. A voice cracked into existence. "Hello?" The sound came haltingly, not with the polish of a prepared guest, but the rawness of someone who had nothing left to protect. "My name is... I'm sorry," she choked, then continued, her words spilling over each other like grief rushing through a dam. "I didn't plan to speak. I saw you, Congresswoman Crockett, and I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Jasmine didn't speak. She bowed her head gently, listening. The caller steadied herself with a long exhale that trembled through the studio speaker system. "My son's name is Darius," she said. "He's 17. He's been in jail for 6 months now. He didn't hurt anyone. It was a shoplifting charge. His friends dared him to take a pair of headphones from a gas station. $40. That's what it cost. But he couldn't afford bail. $900. I begged the court for a payment plan, anything. But they said no." A hush fell across the studio like the final breath before a plunge. Even Hannity, who moments earlier had thundered about law and order, sat utterly still. His fingers no longer tapped. His eyes didn't wander. He stared down at the table as the voice continued, fragile, but gaining momentum, like a wound being opened on purpose. "He missed his graduation," she said. "He missed Thanksgiving. He missed his little sister's birthday. Every time I visit, he just sits there, shoulders hunched, like he's already disappeared inside himself." Her voice cracked again, this time harder, deeper. "I raised him to believe this country would protect him if he followed the rules. But they never taught me what to say when the rules were sold to someone else." The control room was silent. Not a single crew member moved. The live audience had stopped reacting entirely, frozen between shame and revelation. "I'm a nurse," the woman said. "I work nights. I've never broken the law in my life. But now I have to look my son in the eyes through a glass wall and explain why freedom in this country costs more than we have." Jasmine stood motionless, her hands folded at her waist, her breath shallow. She didn't interrupt. She didn't rescue. She witnessed. And that, more than anything, was what the woman on the other end needed. "Do you know what he said to me last week?" the caller whispered. "He said, 'Mama, I didn't steal the headphones, but I think I'd rather admit it than stay here any longer.'" Gasps rippled through the air, but they were soft, reverent, not the usual outrage of partisan theater. "They broke him," she said, "not with fists, with waiting, with silence, with time," her voice faltered. "I just want him home. I just want him to know he's still worth something, that he's not just a case number or a bed quota or a line on a chart." She paused, then, with every ounce of breath she had left, "Please don't let them tell this story like it's just statistics. It's my baby. It's my child." The line went quiet. A static hum filled the void. She didn't hang up. She didn't need to. Her words had already stayed. Jasmine raised her head slowly. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't wipe them. She didn't speak yet. The room was frozen in something far more powerful than debate, grief. And in that stillness, Sean Hannity, so often quick with a retort, a counterattack, a change of subject, remained completely, utterly silent. No cards shuffled, no cross-talk whispered through his earpiece. He stared forward like a man watching the floor dissolve beneath him. The story had landed not as commentary, but as a mirror, reflecting a truth so raw, so intimate, that even denial had no place to hide. The audience didn't applaud. It couldn't. It wouldn't. Because applause would have broken the spell. And this wasn't performance. This was revelation. For a moment, the entire nation, through cameras, through cables, through every glowing screen, stood in that same invisible jail cell with Darius, counting the days, wondering how justice became something you could lose access to for $900, wondering how many other mothers were still waiting by a phone, holding their stories in their throats like broken glass. And still, Jasmine said nothing, because in that moment, silence wasn't avoidance, it was respect. Because some truths don't need explanation, only exposure. And as the last tremor of that mother's voice dissolved into the stillness, leaving behind a silence too sacred for applause and too sharp for comfort, Jasmine Crockett took one breath, one slow recalibration of grief into resolve. She didn't look down. She didn't blink. She turned her gaze back to the camera, then reached again for the remote. Her thumb hovered for a moment over the button, and when she pressed it, the studio lights dimmed just enough for the screen behind her to glow like a confession no one could unhear. "Let's stop pretending this is about safety," she said quietly, "and watch how it's actually about sales." A video loaded. The footage was grainy but real, unedited, unrehearsed, and devastating. A corporate conference room appeared on screen, sterile and professional. A man in a dark navy suit, Robert Warden, chief executive of GEO Group, stood at a podium, facing a room filled with investors. The camera caught the glint of crystal water pitchers, the low murmur of anticipation before an earnings report. Jasmine didn't speak. She let the man speak for himself. His voice rang out, calm and proud, projected across the studio speakers. "Our model remains stable because we're confident in occupancy rates. Each inmate is, functionally speaking, a revenue unit. Our focus is not only on securing long-term federal contracts, but also ensuring operational continuity across facilities by maintaining a healthy population baseline." There was a pause in the video, but not in the room. The weight of that sentence, "each inmate is a revenue unit," didn't need emphasis. It echoed louder than any scream. The screen showed no shame, no hesitation, just a spreadsheet behind the CEO, listing terms like capacity utilization, growth forecasts, and average length of stay. Jasmine let it roll 5 seconds longer, long enough to catch the polite laughter from a board member in the front row. Then she clicked to black. For a moment, there was nothing. Just air. Just the uncomfortable rustling of a few studio chairs. Then Jasmine turned, not dramatically, not with flair, but with precision. She looked Hannity dead in the eye, like someone delivering a name at a sentencing. "That," she said, her voice quiet and razor-edged, "is the truth you won't look in the face." She didn't blink. "Not on your show, not in your monologues, not when you wave the flag and pretend this is about protecting America." Her hand hovered just over the stack of files on the table. "You rail against crime, but stay silent when profit requires incarceration. You say you love justice, but look the other way when freedom is priced like a commodity." She began walking slowly, measured steps toward the center of the set, eyes still locked on Hannity. "That man in the video, he doesn't fear crime. He needs it. He counts on it. He budgets for it." She clicked the remote again, showing a still from the GEO investor deck, a bullet point reading, "Risk, decrease in conviction rates." Her voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it deepened like a tectonic shift. "You understand what that means?" she asked, turning toward the audience now. "To these corporations, fewer arrests aren't signs of peace. They're signs of loss." She let that settle. In a just world, justice is measured by how few people we cage. But in their world, justice means maximizing retention. Then she stepped back, slowly returning to her place behind the desk, her hand never leaving the remote. The studio was still gripped in tension, breathless, not from drama, but from exposure. "You called me dangerous," she said, her voice like cooled iron. "You said I want to burn things down." She pointed again to the screen. But tell me, Mr. Hannity, what's more dangerous than a business model that needs people behind bars to stay afloat? What's more criminal than lobbying Congress for harsher sentencing laws so stockholders don't lose confidence? Her jaw clenched, but her voice remained steady. This isn't justice. This is human trafficking in a tailored suit. Hannity said nothing. His eyes flicked once to the camera feed monitor, then back to Jasmine. But there was nowhere to run in that moment. The air had thickened into something immovable, and Jasmine knew it. She leaned forward now, elbows on the table, voice lowering into a quiet that demanded listening. "I'm not here to dismantle order," she said. "I'm here to dismantle the lie that order ever existed in the first place, for people who look like me." She reached once more for the remote and set it down with finality. Because if one man's incarceration funds another man's yacht, then what we have isn't a system. It's a marketplace, and lives like Darius's, like Kalief's, are just product codes. She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The screen behind her remained dark, but somehow it still spoke louder than Hannity ever could. And after the video faded to black, after Jasmine's words carved corporate cruelty into the bones of the broadcast, she didn't need to yell, didn't need to gloat. She simply lowered her hand, reached for the thick folder that had carried the weight of every statistic, every obituary, every plea for dignity. Slowly, deliberately, she closed it. The sound of the cover snapping shut was soft, barely audible, but somehow thundered in the room like a final judgment. She didn't speak right away. She looked down at the folder for a moment longer, as if acknowledging every name it held, every story that hadn't made the news. When she finally raised her head, her voice had dropped, not with weakness, but with intent, a stillness that demanded reverence. And then it came, low, level, devastating. If a teenager can be caged just because he doesn't have $500, then tell me, what part of that justice system is worth being proud of? The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They hung, like the final line of a eulogy, like smoke after a silent explosion. The camera instinctively tightened its frame, drawing closer to Hannity's face. He wasn't blinking. His jaw clenched slightly, barely perceptible. His hands, once so animated with righteous indignation, now sat still, folded, uncertain, no longer performing. For the first time in the segment, there was no counter, no deflection, no talking point plucked from a stack of cue cards off camera. Just silence, a silence thick enough to feel, the kind that follows something irreversibly true. The live audience didn't make a sound. The floor director didn't give any cue. The teleprompter didn't scroll. Time itself seemed to pause, unsure if it should proceed as scheduled or surrender to what had just been laid bare. The screen behind them was blank now, but it may as well have read, "Convicted by truth." Jasmine didn't move. She didn't fill the air with follow-ups or pivot to statistics. She let the question sit like a stone in the center of the room, a $500 stone, a price tag on freedom, a number so absurd in its cruelty that it hollowed out everything Hannity had tried to defend for the last 40 minutes. She leaned slightly back in her chair, not in retreat, but in still, righteous defiance. Her hands folded atop the folder, her breathing slow, deliberate. She wasn't waiting for a response. She knew there wasn't one. There couldn't be. Not one that wouldn't sound like noise against what had just been made visible. Hannity shifted once in his seat, brief, reflexive. A man realizing he was no longer on a fence, no longer controlling the camera or the cadence or the crowd. For years, he had orchestrated this stage, reduced arguments into neat binaries. Strong versus weak, tough versus soft, law versus chaos. But now in this moment, the binary shattered. Because what Jasmine had done wasn't offer a counter-narrative. She had exposed the foundation, and exposed that it was rotting. She tilted her head just slightly toward the audience. Not performative, but intimate. Like someone telling the truth not for applause, but because the silence had gone on too long. "Justice," she said softly, "should not be a luxury." She glanced at the cameras, at the nation. It should not be a privilege of the wealthy or a currency for shareholders. It should not bend around skin tone or zip code. And it damn sure shouldn't be a death sentence for being born poor. The words weren't shouted, but they struck like a slow drumbeat inside the chest of every viewer, on phones, on TVs, on laptops flickering in living rooms across America. Still, Hannity said nothing. His mouth parted just slightly, as if the shape of a sentence was trying to form, but nothing came. The camera lingered on him, and for once it didn't feel like spectacle. It felt like accountability. The audience watched, not for drama, but for proof that he had heard her, that the machine could pause, that even the most polished performers had to sit in a truth they couldn't spin. But all they got was silence. He looked away, not far, just enough to signal discomfort. Then back, still no words, and Jasmine, watching him, simply nodded once. A slow, solemn nod. Not of victory, but of recognition. She wasn't surprised. This was always how it went. Speak the truth, the full, undiluted truth, and those who benefit from the lie will retreat into silence, not because they have no voice, but because for once, they have no defense. She looked down again at the folder, still closed, as if to say, "There's more in here. I could keep going, but you've already heard enough." Then slowly, she slid it to the center of the table. "Here's your law and order," she whispered, not accusingly, but mournfully. "A child sits in jail because his mother didn't have $500. And we dare to call that justice?" Her hand stayed on the folder for a long moment, fingers curled slightly around the edge. Not for control, but because letting go of it too quickly felt wrong. Felt like betrayal. The lights didn't dim. The show didn't cut to commercial. The audience didn't applaud. And Hannity still said nothing. Because in that moment, the set had stopped being a studio. It had become a courtroom. Not the kind with gavels and robes, but the kind where a nation, watching silently from couches and cubicles and corner stores, had just seen the defendant lose control of his own argument. And the verdict? It was already written. In ink. In silence. In the empty space where a rebuttal should have been, but never came. And as the cameras faded to black and the studio fell into stillness, the impact of what had just unfolded did not stay confined to the soundstage. It moved swiftly, violently, like a rupture in the surface of a country long conditioned to ignore what lay beneath. In living rooms, break rooms, subway cars, courthouse steps, people weren't just watching a clip. They were reliving something. Something buried. Something personal. Something systemically denied. The recording of Jasmine Crockett's confrontation didn't go viral because it was dramatic. It went viral because it was undeniable. Within an hour of the broadcast, the moment where Jasmine looked straight into the camera and asked, "If a teenager can be caged just because he doesn't have $500, then what part of that justice system is worth being proud of?" That moment was everywhere. It was clipped, looped, translated, and sent across the country like a live wire. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Youth organizers blasted it on megaphones outside city halls. In barbershops, you could hear men grow silent mid-conversation, staring at the screen as that one sentence played again. Not all of them had words, but all of them understood, because they'd seen that boy before. In a cousin, a neighbor, a brother, the kid down the street who disappeared and never came back the same. News anchors scrambled to catch up, but this time, the headlines didn't shape the story. The people did. And the story wasn't just about a failed bail system. It was about what it meant to live in a country where freedom has a price tag and where the inability to pay meant forfeiting your humanity. Local news stations began reporting fresh cases, children locked up for months without trial over bus fare thefts, misplaced wallets, petty shoplifting. The lines between policy and punishment, law and cruelty, blurred in public consciousness like never before. America briefly saw the bars not just around cells, but around neighborhoods, classrooms, futures. But it was one tweet, just one, that turned the echo into a drumbeat. Late that night, as her team monitored the staggering reaction, Jasmine herself sat alone in her office. The overhead light was off, the room lit only by the glow of her screen and the photo of Khalif Browder beside it, framed, unassuming, but present. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Media inquiries, speaking invitations, private texts from members of Congress who'd once ignored her floor speeches, now typing out variations of, "You were right." But she didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. She opened Twitter. She typed without drafting, without checking, without hesitation. Not everyone in jail is guilty, but any system that jails the poor because they're poor is a system that deserves to be on trial. No flourish, no emojis, just the weight of conviction distilled into 140 characters. The tweet didn't just travel, it tethered, not to the usual noise of political discourse, but to the real people who had lived it. Mothers who had mortgaged their homes for bail. Teens who'd come out of holding cells with shadows in their eyes. Public defenders who'd fought uphill in courtrooms built like factories. Within hours, the message had reached every corner of the country, not as a plea for policy, but as a line in the sand, a dare, a mirror, and the country was now staring back at itself. Civil rights groups reposted it with statements of solidarity. Former judges quoted it at town halls. Community leaders painted the words on banners at protests. But the most powerful echoes didn't come from organizations. They came from individuals. From a young man in Georgia who simply wrote, "This tweet is the first time I've seen someone say out loud what happened to me." From a mother in Ohio who shared her son's story and closed with, "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." And yet Jasmine didn't treat the tweet as a victory. She didn't log off and smile. She didn't bask in trending status. She stared at her screen, then back at Khalif's photo. "You should still be here," she whispered. "You should have made it to 25. You should have been free." She closed her laptop slowly and leaned back in her chair, eyes still fixed on the darkened window that reflected the city lights of D.C. Her voice low, steady, only for herself. The system's on trial now, and this time, it doesn't get to walk away. Outside her office, the noise swelled. Journalists gathered. Emails poured in. But inside that room, Jasmine Crockett wasn't preparing for interviews. She was preparing for something deeper, for the reckoning she had just triggered. A reckoning not born in protest chants or party platforms, but in the haunting simplicity of one brutal question. What kind of justice charges children for their innocence? And in one uncompromising truth, if that is the law, then the law itself is guilty. And as the digital noise thundered beyond the walls of her quiet office, retweets, headlines, angry rebuttals, tearful affirmations, Jasmine remained still. The tweet had landed. The country had reacted. But for her, the work was not in the virality. It was in the aftermath, in the reckoning that would follow or fail to, in the hearts that would either change or retreat to comfort. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight settle, not just of Khalif's story, but of the thousands like his. The names that wouldn't go viral, the pain that wouldn't be televised. Because behind every statistic she'd read on air, every graph, every policy critique, was a human being who once believed the law would protect them, and learned too late that it was built to profit instead. That was the lesson the cameras never lingered on. Not the spectacle, the soul of the thing. The terrifying truth that injustice isn't always loud. It's efficient. It has paperwork. It has signatures. It has bipartisan support and legal precedent. It wears suits, not hoods. And it doesn't need to shout to break a life. It just needs to ignore it. That's how Khalif Browder was lost. Not because no one knew, but because no one stopped it. Because the gears kept turning and the courtroom didn't pause and the guards didn't ask questions. Because when a system forgets that the people it cages are human, it becomes something else entirely. A business model with a body count. Jasmine had known this, but now America had seen it, and she needed them to remember what it meant. Not just in legislation, but in conscience. In what kind of country they claimed to be. Because the real fight wasn't over bail reform or prison contracts, not entirely. The real fight was moral. It was about what we believe people deserve. Whether freedom is a right or a reward. Whether a child with no money is worth less than a child with a lawyer. Whether justice is blind or just expensive. The humanity at the core of Jasmine's crusade wasn't rooted in slogans or party lines. It was in the aching universality of the question. What if it were your child? What if it were your brother, your daughter, your name etched onto that intake form in the middle of the night, waiting for a court date that never came? What would you be worth in a world that measures dignity by income? The truth is, the system wasn't broken. It was built with precision. And the most dangerous part wasn't how violently it punished, but how quietly it justified. So the human lesson, was this: justice without compassion is just arithmetic. Law without empathy is just architecture. And safety that only exists for the privileged isn't safety at all. It's control dressed in clean language. That night, Jasmine scribbled in a notebook beside her desk. Not a speech, not a press release, just a sentence she didn't want to forget. She wrote, "We are not fighting to reform cruelty. We are fighting to replace it with something human." And that, in the end, was the point. That a mother's tears should mean more than a lobbyist's check. That a child's silence in a jail cell should echo louder than a corporate quarterly report. That the worth of a human being should not fluctuate with their bank balance. Because if the law does not recognize the poor as fully human, then the law is not worthy of the society it claims to serve. And if we don't fix that, not just in legislation, but in how we see each other, then we will continue bearing children like Khalif, not because we failed to act, but because we refused to feel. And what Jasmine offered that night, more than any data or quote or devastating line, was this: a reminder that compassion isn't weakness, it's power. That the only justice worth defending is the kind that knows every defendant has a heartbeat, and that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is look at someone our system has discarded and say, "You still matter." Not because it polls well, not because it wins elections, but because it is true. And as the last syllable of Jasmine's midnight tweet echoed through a nation split between conscience and convenience, she knew it had touched something raw. But knowledge wasn't enough. Mourning wasn't enough. Even outrage, if not harnessed, was nothing but fire without direction. What had happened in that studio wasn't a performance. It was a summons. And Jasmine wasn't going to let it fade into another viral moment that lived and died inside a headline. If people could feel the injustice that intimately, if they could weep for Khalif, gasp at the $500 bail, rage over the CEO's voice calling human lives revenue units, then they were ready to be called. So the next morning, with sleep-deprived eyes and a still shaking hand, Jasmine walked out of her office and stepped in front of a press gaggle already triple the usual size. But she didn't go to the Capitol. She didn't go to the polished halls of power. She stood on the courthouse steps of a local detention facility in D.C., the exact kind of place where boys like Khalif disappear every single day. The morning air was thick with humidity and tension. Cameramen adjusted lenses. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder in silence. A mother in the front row clutched a laminated photo of her teenage son. Jasmine didn't wait for the cameras to signal. She gripped the podium with both hands. And when she spoke, it wasn't with applause in mind. It was with urgency that cracked like thunder. "We have spent the last 24 hours grieving," she said, her voice steady but electric. "But I didn't come here to grieve. I came here to interrupt." Her words sliced the morning open like a scalpel. "We've all seen the video. We've all heard the mother on the phone. We've seen the charts, the headlines. But let me be clear, awareness is not action, and justice doesn't grow from sympathy. It grows from pressure." She held up a document, her draft bill to abolish cash bail nationwide. The crowd shifted forward as if gravity itself had changed. "I am calling for the end of wealth-based detention in America," she continued, her voice rising now. "Not tomorrow, not when it's politically convenient. Now." She slapped the paper on the podium. "Because every day we wait, another child is caged not because of guilt, but because their parents couldn't wire transfer dignity in time." She stared into the nearest camera lens, piercing every home watching. And if that sentence doesn't light a fire under you, then maybe you've never had to choose between rent and a court fee. The reporters jotted notes, but Jasmine wasn't talking to them. She was talking to the ones watching from laundromats, from prison waiting rooms, from classrooms where the textbooks were older than the students. "We're told that the law is neutral, that it applies equally. But tell me, Where's the equality in a child being held for 300 days while a hedge fund heir walks free the same afternoon? She paused, letting the quiet swell with rage. This isn't justice, this is arithmetic. It's a calculator disguised as a gavel. She looked down at the front row. The mother with the laminated photo met her gaze. Jasmine's voice softened, but the power in it sharpened. To every parent who's been told their child will sit a few nights unless they can find the money, I see you. To every public defender with 80 open cases and a broken copier, I see you. To every kid who pled guilty to something they didn't do just to go home, I see you. She took a breath, not out of fatigue, but to keep herself from cracking. And I will not stop until this system either changes or collapses under the weight of its own cruelty. Then came the call. Not soft, not poetic, but sharp. Director, operational. I'm calling on every state legislator with a conscience to introduce mirror legislation within the next 60 days. No more hiding behind federal gridlock. The time to act is not after the next child dies in a jail cell. The time is now, the crowd murmured. I'm calling on civil rights organizations to shift from awareness campaigns to legal war. I'm calling on district attorneys to audit their pretrial population and release anyone being held solely for lack of funds. And I'm calling on you, the people, not just to post, but to pressure. Your mayor, your judge, your sheriff, name them, tag them, call them out. Her eyes gleam now, not with tears, but with a clarity that only comes when pain becomes purpose. I'm asking students to organize. I'm asking faith leaders to preach. I'm asking artists to make this impossible to forget. And I'm telling billionaires, if you're not funding the solution, then you're complicit in the problem. She held up a second sheet of paper, Khalif's story, not a summary, the original intake report, mugshot, age, bond amount. This, she said, is not a historical artifact. It's a blueprint. There are thousands more just like it. And this time, we don't bury the blueprint. We burn it. And then she looked directly at the mother in the front row, the one still clutching the photo like a rosary. Jasmine stepped down from the podium. She walked to her. She took her hand, held it, and then turned back to the crowd, holding it high, not like a trophy, but like a vow. We fight, she said, because she shouldn't be standing here with a photograph. She should be standing here with her son. The crowd roared, not with celebration, but with resolve. Phones didn't just record, they broadcast. Her speech went live in real time to millions. And in classrooms and break rooms and prison visitor lines, people didn't just watch, they stood. Not because Jasmine had given them permission, but because she had given them language. She had turned mourning into marching orders. That day, bail funds doubled in donations. 10 new chapters of youth abolition groups were formed before sunset. A coalition of public defenders across 5 cities launched a coordinated mass motion for release of all nonviolent detainees under $1,000 bail. And for the first time, corporate donors began pulling out of GEO Group and Core Civic, citing in their own words, irreparable reputational risk. One CEO tweeted, "If Jasmine Crockett is coming, we're not standing in the way." By midnight, police union reps were on TV. Governors issued panic statements. Senate leadership called her office. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. She just walked back into her office, kicked off her heels, and whispered to herself the same line she'd written in that notebook the night before. We are not here to fix cruelty. We are here to end it. And this time, it wasn't just a promise. It was a marching order, a reckoning, a revolution, demanded, organized, and owned by the very people the system had spent decades trying to silence. The system had spoken. Now the people were speaking back. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.